Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Matt Filipovitz, joined by my phenomenal co-host, Mr. Bill DeFilippo. Bill, can you be feeling any better about Penn State football right now?
I'm going to do myself and everyone else a favor. I'm going to recommend that you lower down your microphones for a second because I'm about to clear my throat, and after I clear my throat, I am going to do the Ric Flair.
It's going to freak your dog out.
Woo!
Yeah, I think that's the way everybody feels right now, following Penn State's 34-12 win over the West Virginia Mountaineers. Penn State came out of the gate a little bit slow, but once they found their footing, even despite like a 4-hour rain delay, Penn State never let up. It was a great performance from Andy Kotelnicki. By the way, time of recording, happy birthday to Andy Kotelnicki. I saw James Franklin tweeted that out. So the big Zamboni, another year older, another win under his belt. But Bill, let's jump right in. How you feeling? This looked like what I think you especially said you wanted to see out of Penn State's offense to make you think that they have made a substantial step forward this offseason.
I'm fast. Did anyone call him the Big Zamboni before Gus Johnson decided that was his nickname?
No.
I know this is one of Gus's things where he just like sits in the lab and cooks up a nickname for people. But was the Big Zamboni? Did I miss that one?
I have no idea what it's from. Like, I don't know if it's because like he's from Wisconsin. I don't know if it has something to do with that, but I kind of like it.
You watched the game in a bar,
I did.
correct? Like without the audio.
No, the audio was on in this bar.
Okay. Yeah. Gus explained it on the broadcast where he basically said that Kotelnicki grew up playing hockey. And as such, one thing led to another, and like Gus woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat and wrote the Big Zamboni down on the piece of paper that he pulled out of the drawer in his hotel next to that Bible that is in every hotel room. But yeah, I mean, what was the question again?
Bill, just overall, could this have gone? You especially called out some specific things that you wanted to see from the Penn State offense that would make you say, like, I think things are fixed. Did you see what you wanted? Give me your 10,000-foot view of this game, essentially. And did you see what you were hoping to see to make you say, oh, this is different now?
So my 10,000-foot view of this game is that we fundamentally saw two completely different football games, and it was because of the weather delay. And I thought of a quote that I heard George Kittle give once. He went on to Theo Vaughn's podcast and was asked about the physical toll of playing a football game. And I went back and I jotted that down, as we were preparing for the pod. And George Kittle, obvious, unbelievable tight end for the San Francisco 49ers, described playing football as, quote, I'm in a car accident every Sunday, multiple car accidents every Sunday. You get in these car accidents and it takes like Thursday to Friday is when I start to feel like myself again. And football players inherently, like, your body gets into a rhythm of you play half an hour, you know what to do for 20 minutes in the locker room to stay loose, to stay fresh. Then you go out and you play for another half. In football time, it's really like hour and a half, 2 hours each half, whatever. And the game got so radically changed by them playing the first half, having to spend 140 minutes in between halves and then going out and playing again, which then had the added thing on top of it of the game state when they went into the locker room for halftime with Penn State up 2 scores and then coming out of the locker room and immediately scoring to go up 3 scores. I jotted this down heading into the, I jotted this down for both teams, Matt. In the first half, Penn State ran the ball 14 times and threw it 13 times. In the second half, they ran it 28 times and threw it 5 times. West Virginia, first half, 16 rushes, 18 passes. Second half, 11 and 11. My thing with this game is that once we got into the second half, after that delay and after everything else, I think, obviously I'm making an assumption here. James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen, and the coaching staff got together and said, we're shutting this football game down. We are not letting them get into this. We're going to go out. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to score on our first drive. And then once we're up 3 scores, we know they cannot throw on us good enough to win this football game. So I really think we can. I really think this was just a strange and unique football game, but I do think there's still plenty of positives to take away for it for Penn State.
So I'm glad you called that out about coming out of halftime. Penn State had all the momentum in the world, and they could decide, even after the rain delay, how to handle that second half of football. I really liked the aggressiveness when they got the ball back to go out there and try to score with about 45 seconds left. That's not new for Penn State, I didn't think. Penn State did that last year against West Virginia. They got the ball back pretty late in the half. They marched down for a scoring drive. Sahedek missed the kick back in 2023. So that's not nothing new. I'm absolutely stunned that West Virginia's defense went man coverage twice. Like, I don't know if that's just they read the scouting report and they didn't think Penn State's receivers could beat them. That's not an option anymore, I don't think, after this game. That ball to Amari Evans, probably a push-off, but, they don't call it. That's something we didn't see last year. Either Aller wouldn't throw it or Yurcich wouldn't call it. To see Kotelnicki do that and then follow that up with, there's 9 seconds left in this half, let's go to our number 1 guy, Trey Wallace. And Trey Wallace made a play on the football on a beautifully placed ball by Drew Aller. By the way, Aller's final stat line, 11 for 17, 216 yards and 3 scores. He added in 44 more yards on the ground. And none of those were sack yardage as well. Like, he was not sacked the entire game. He fell forward. He moved the sticks. And then Trey Wallace, for, just for reference, 5 catches, 117 yards, 2 touchdowns. His coming out party, I think, to the national media. So good for those guys.
Yeah.
But
and can I flag something real quick that goes off of what you said? One thing that I think Andy Kotelnicki did incredibly well in this football game was picking the spots to go fast, and not go fast in the way that Mike Yurcich like to go fast, which don't get me wrong, like, for how much ragging we do on Mike Yurcich, there is merit to get up to the line of scrimmage, look at what the defense is giving you, light box, run it, not a light box, throw the little screen, and just take what the defense gives you. Like, there is absolutely merit to that. But there are 2 plays, one of which you just mentioned, that I want to flag here that are examples of Andy Kotelnicki using tempo, using speed, using the fact that West Virginia wasn't ready against them. And they were the play for the second touchdown, Katron Allen scoring a touchdown, and what you just mentioned, the chunk play to Amari Evans. For the touchdown, where Drew ends up throwing it to Katron Allen, and Katron does the rest. Penn State's facing a 4th and 4, throw the football to Tyler Warren, really simple pitch and catch to get the first down. Penn State, I got my cell phone out, I pulled up the stopwatch. It was 15 seconds between when the referee blew the whistle for the play to be dead and when they hiked the ball for the next play. And West Virginia just was not ready. And that's why Drew was able to get, even if that's not a touchdown, that's a first down to Katron Allen, because there was just nobody within his immediate vicinity. Go to the next one, that the Amari Evans chunk play. Singleton runs for a yard, no gain, whatever it is. Obviously, in that situation, every single person on West Virginia's sideline, probably most people on Penn State's sideline, everyone in the stadium, me on my couch, you at the bar you were watching at, everyone wherever they're watching going, all right, Penn State's taking this down to the half. Between the play being called dead for Nick Singleton's run for no gain, a yard, whatever it was, and the ball being snapped for the 55-yard completion to Amari Evans, 10 seconds went by. It took 10 seconds for West Virginia to, in that 10 seconds, West Virginia probably just assumed Penn State was going to get up and run the football again, because I think WVU had all their timeouts. Instead, Penn State gets up there, and you noticed it. You pointed out that they're in man. West Virginia had no clue that Penn State was used that short gain and the fact that everyone thought they were trying to get into the locker room for halftime as a way to pick up a chunk play, a way to pick up a 55-yard gain. And I think that's, I just wanted to mention that. I wanted to make sure we flagged that as we're talking about all this, because one thing James Franklin said in the offseason, and it's something that Andy Kotelnicki mentioned also, was that you want the offense to be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want it to be so reactive all the time. There are obviously times where you have to react to what the defense is giving you and take it. And we saw a few examples of that. But when you are able to get them on their back foot,
Mm-hmm.
when you are able to catch them off guard, good things can happen. Good things will happen if you could really catch them off guard. And Andy Kotelnicki, in a way that we wanted to see last year, and we kind of expected and hoped coming into this season, was able to do that to set up two of the biggest plays of the afternoon for Penn State.
So I know you're a big process guy, and I'm pulling the play up on my phone because I thought I saw something, but I want to confirm it. And I'll go back to last year, the Penn State-Indiana game, I believe it was, where I thought it looked like Drew Aller for the first time had a little bit of confidence and a little bit of swagger to him. And that was a really good spot. There was a touchdown pass he threw to Theo Johnson in that game where it was an empty set. Theo Johnson was in one-on-one against the linebacker in the middle of the field, and a good scheme on the offense's part then. They cleared everybody just out of Theo's way, and Theo was in one-on-one and just bodied a dude. What Amari Evans did, I just rewatched the play to confirm. Basically, the scheme of that was everybody kind of cut their routes off early, and Amari was one-on-one. There was nobody within 10 yards of this guy, so there's no one to help. The true 50-50 ball to the middle of the field was such a rarity for Penn State under Mike Yurcich. And the one time they ran it that I can remember, it worked in the red zone. To do it in the open field when you're trying to score, granted, I think a lot of the confidence behind that is that you don't trust West Virginia to, if they pick the ball off, they're probably not scoring again with that little time. So I like that process. But to watch that happen and that kind of confidence is huge. And I'm super excited that Amari Evans is able to go out there and be that guy to go up there and get a 50-50 ball, because he's not the guy we thought would do that. We thought that would be Trey Wallace, Julian Fleming, Tyler Warren. So I watched the game at the bar. First of all, there was a guy in an old blog shirt at the bar. Shout out to John from Pittsburgh, who was in town to see Pearl Jam, who I met at the bar. Great guy. Bill, the energy that everybody felt after they kind of got the yips out was just infectious. And it's such a bummer that we lost all that momentum, with the rain delay. And I eventually went home for the second half, but just the vibes. Bill, I had 2 Bloody Marys before like 12:30 Central Time, dude. I had to go home.
I raised you better than this.
Is true.
We do not quit.
This is true. I could have easily have spent like $100 at this bar, though, in fairness to me. But yeah, Bill,
you say that like I accept that as an excuse.
Fair enough.
It's the season opener, son.
That's true. On the road in a Power 5 opponent. And Bill, one more thing I want to touch on before we kind of shift into our next topic. Cool. The one thing that I was most impressed with about Andy Kotelnicki is Drew starts the game with a bad fumble. If they snapped it inappropriately, whatever, it is what it is. Fumbles happen, part of the game. Great job of the defense to go out there and do what we said would happen last year if Drew turned it over. Hey, they'll probably get the ball back, or hey, they're going to make a play for you. Like, cool. Theory, confirmation is what we had in that regard. So I was excited about that. He misses a bad throw to Amari Evans on like a, 1st and 10, just a slant route that he just threw behind him. After that, to settle him back in, he calls basically a hitch that he sits at. Trey Wallace cuts in a little bit at 6 yards, sits basically in the flat, and it's an easy completion for Aller. And right there, that's what gets him back in rhythm. So what Andy Kotelnicki saw, fumble, bad miss. All right, let's calm down a little bit. Let's get Drew in rhythm, give him an easy throw, and then the horses were off from there. So I loved to see that from Andy Kotelnicki, man. Like, I could not be more impressed with the big Zamboni after 1 week, man. Like, you got to see it more weeks to really feel like we were, heading in the right direction, because again, they looked awesome against West Virginia last year, but I thought Drew like a different animal, this week. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning on that layup that he had to Trey Wallace. And I'm going to mention that and then the very next throw, which is the big gain to the 55-yard touchdown or whatever it was for Trey Wallace.
On the sideline.
50. So on that one where Trey just sits down to a little opening in the defense, they send Nick Singleton in motion. And all Drew is doing in that situation is reading, I believe it was a linebacker. It was either a linebacker or like, slot corner safety type of guy. And what he's going to end up doing, if he passes Singleton off to the outside corner who is playing, I think, basically back at the line of scrimmage. He's just going to dump it to Nick Singleton there and probably get about the same game. Well, who knows what ends up happening? It probably ends up being a pretty similar outcome. Instead, he goes with Singleton out to the edge, just gives him the opportunity for that little layup right there with Trey Wallace. Very next play, they run the double post pattern with Trey Wallace and Julian Fleming.
Out of the stack.
And it's a very...
I love a stack formation, man. I love a stack formation.
And it's a very similar thing where all Drew is doing is watching where that defensive back at the line of scrimmage is going. If he goes with Trey Wallace instead of Julian Fleming, Fleming's just running that little post to the sideline and Drew's dropping that in, and maybe that ends up going for a touchdown. Instead, he ends up going with Trey. He ends up going with Fleming, and you can see before Trey is even out of his break, that ball is out of Drew's hands because he knows where to go with it. It's the thing that we wanted to see with Andy. It was one of the big things we wanted to see with Andy Kotelnicki, which is just, can you get Drew Aller easy throws into windows that you scheme open and just let the rest take care of itself? And you mentioned it early. It was only the first game. There's still more that has to happen. All these various things have to carry from week to week to week. We can sit here, we can nitpick a bunch of different things about this and this and that. Like even on the big game to Amari Evans, if Drew just chucks that down the field, Amari is running past his man.
Oh my God. Yeah. That dude was burned. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's stuff that we could nitpick, but in the context of first game on the road, Pat McAfee has spent the last week trying to gin up a mob to overcome the fact that West Virginia shouldn't have been on the same field as Penn State. Like, new offensive coordinator, a quarterback who, we could do some reading between the lines on this one, had zero confidence last year and came out just carrying himself. Like, Drew goddamn Aller was wearing chains during this football game around his neck. Like, what the hell, man? That's not the guy who was sobbing in the press room after the Ohio State game. He was getting up after first downs and signaling that he got the first down. He stiff arms Jeremiah Trotter's son on a run where he picks up a first. Like, everything that we wanted to see about how they carried themselves, how they went about their business in an environment that was hostile and had, like we mentioned, such a strange variable thrown into the middle of it that made it a fundamentally different football game. A pluses across the board. Even if you want to sit here and say like, this could have been a little better, this could have a little bit better. They have time to correct that stuff and fix that stuff. They would not have had time or grace or anything if they lost this football game. And they instead just went out and took care of business.
Two things I want to call out. Bill, they had 4 plays of 40 or more yards in this game. I'm sure you've seen the stat. How many did they have all of 2023?
Not a lot, but like Nick Singleton eclipsed his longest run of last year on 2 separate occasions.
If you remember, I called on the podcast. I called on our preview show. I thought that was going to happen. Bill, they had 8 plays of 40 plus yards all of last year. They had 4 in this game.
And I want to mention something. Friend of the program, Landon Tengwall.
What's up, Landon?
Friend of the program and media personality, Landon Tengwall, pointed out that 16% of Penn State's offensive plays were explosive plays against West Virginia, which is a rush of 10 yards or more or a pass of 15 yards or more. 16%, I don't have what the number was last year. In the passing game, Penn State completed 12 passes. They attempted 18 passes, okay? 7 of their 12 completions went for 15 or more yards. An 8th pass went for 14 yards, and a 9th went for 13.
And one was on 4th down where the priority was move the sticks, not get a big play.
Right. Like, they did every single thing we could have asked them to in the passing game. Again, I will say this a million times on this podcast. Once it got to the second half and once they scored out of the second half, they just completely shut things down. But in the first half, 13 pass plays for 199 yards. As good as you could have asked for. They found the explosive plays, particularly in the passing game. Obviously, they came in the rushing game as well. just about everything you could have wanted out of Penn State's offense in the first game, other than, I would have liked to see them score 50 points, but who am I to complain?
I feel like we've been gushing about this passing game for a while. Let's give the running game their flowers. Katron Allen
For sure.
didn't have the best game, 10 carries for 20 yards. It sounds like he's been a little banged up throughout camp, so this feels more like shaking off the rust. But again, still made a play in the passing game. Love to see that. Bill, Nick Singleton's back. I feel confident that dude is back to what we thought he was going to be back in 2023. Again, 13 carries, 114 yards. That's 8.8 yards per carry, and that long touchdown. And he could have very easily have had another on that one play where maybe it was a horse collar. Who knows? Whatever. It is what it is. Penn State scored in that drive.
It was a horse collar.
Penn State scored anyway because Tyler Warren, first overall pick, always gets in the end zone. Bill, I loved what I was able to see from this offensive line. Nick Dawkins, I thought, played better than I could have ever imagined. Again, if you listen to the preview podcast, I was watching him very closely to see if Vega or Cooper Cousins was going to get in, if he was on, if he had a quick hook. So I was excited to see that. Sal Wormley, Vega, Donko was a great run blocker. The stuff Kotelnicki did with Vega, bringing him in motion, was hilarious. Awesome. Loved it. But Bill, this run game, with what Aller gives you now, with the Prabula package, which I was really excited to see work, and I'm so glad they threw out of it, because right away now, defenses have to be ready for that. But again, he's going to do most of his damage with his legs. Overall, for the team, 42 carries, 222 yards on the ground, and that one touchdown. Bill, do you feel like the run game is fixed, quote unquote, similar to how you do the passing game after this one performance?
Worth mentioning, I don't think that the passing game is fixed. I think they showed a lot of promise.
Okay.
I think they showed a lot of promise, and they now have to build on that. And I believe they can build on that. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say exactly they're done. Like they've reached their final form. I'm not worried about this necessarily, but two guys caught passes. There's more. We'll
get to that in a second.
There's a way to go. I'm not worried, but with the rushing game, like you mentioned, Katron Allen been dinged up this offseason. James Franklin had mentioned previously that Allen didn't participate in the spring due to an injury. So he was using the summer to kind of build himself back up a little bit. First half, 14 rushes, 49 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. Second half, 28 for 173, 6.1 yards per carry. Nick Singleton, of course, showed a ton of promise in the running game, looking like Nick Singleton, not looking like the guy from last year who would get past the line of scrimmage, reliably get you 4 or 5 yards, and that was kind of the end of it. Showed a little bit of wiggle, showed the ability to see and hit the hole in a way that we needed to see out of him. And again, a lot of promise. I don't think West Virginia's back seven is particularly good, but first signs of a guy who is getting back to his form from his freshman campaign. And then you mentioned it, like a big thing that held the running game back last year was the lack of a QB run game out of Drew Aller, in part because Mike Yurcich didn't want there to be much of a QB run game, but also because just not Drew's forte. There were reports coming out of camp that he slid down a bit, that he trimmed down a bit.
He looked it.
That he was moving a little bit better.
I'll tell you what, dude, that dude still lumbers, but he had that one where he dead-legged a poor linebacker and picked it up on 3rd and 8. Right. And I'm like, that's a different animal now.
Right. And of course, some of these were scrambles. Some of these were pocket collapses and just have to take off. But 6 carries for 44 yards. Let me do some real quick looking into something.
Again, no sacks there too.
Yeah. Last year against Michigan, he ran the ball 10 times for 49 yards. That was more than he had in this game. So this was his second most productive game in terms of rushing yards. That's fine. Like, totally fine. 44 yards, like you mentioned, no sacks, just showing that you have the ability to run. They ran a speed option with Drew Aller as the quarterback.
On like the second drive of the game, dude. I'm like, that's sicko stuff, bro.
Well, no, the one on the second drive of the game was Bo.
Okay.
But they ran one a little bit later in the game where Drew was the guy on the read option. Then, like you mentioned, Bo Prabula, he has that threat. It was very clear with how much we saw the Bo package pulling up the numbers right now. Bo got on the field for 20 snaps in this game, and obviously a good number of those were once the game was out of hand and they just let him be the guy.
I would bet about half, though, or before that. At least half, I'm thinking.
Yeah. But the thing with the Bo package last year was that the offense coordinator clearly did not believe in it. Like, I'm confident that Bo could have made the throw that he made to Tyler Warren for a touchdown if they let him make that throw last year. But Mike Yurcich clearly viewed it like, I think it's pretty safe to say, and I'm making some assumptions here, he viewed the Bo package as an inconvenience.
Yes. That
the head coach wanted this, and it wasn't something that necessarily gelled with him, which is fine. Like, that legitimately is fine. That is something that the offensive coordinator has the autonomy to do things his way. James wanted one thing, Mike Yurcich wanted another. It's
also
fine.
Some context
it didn't
there
end well for
that
him.
I always thought about, Bill. Drew Haller was like Mike Yurcich's hand-picked guy, a 3-star he plucked basically not out of obscurity, but out of a 3-star Ohio quarterback. Bo was a Shiraka commit. Like, Bo was not a guy that Yurcich, I think, really understood how to use. And that's what I think is the great thing about Andy Kotelnicki. He comes in and he goes, okay, great, that's my guy now. I'm gonna figure out a way to use it. And I think that's really special. So, sorry, not to cut you off, but I think that's important context.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Totally fine. And you look at the run game, you look at how, as they leaned on West Virginia more and more over the course of the game, it got better. Ended the game with 5.3 yards per attempt. I'll go back and look at last year and see how many games they ended with 5.3 yards per attempt. And that's even with the caveat that Katron Allen, looked like a guy who was still working to get up to speed, and Cam Wallace got in at the very end and didn't put up big numbers, but it was all like, who
had
cares?
A nice run though.
Truly, had one nice run of 11 yards, but it was promising. Again, something that they need to build on. I'm going to look while you talk here if they ran for 5.3 yards per carry in any games last year. But again, kind of the theme of this game on the offensive side of the football was early returns. Really, all things considered, really could not have gone all that much better.
So we'll end our offensive portion of this podcast by, I'm going to ask you, Bill, for one thing, underrated thing that you liked and one thing that you didn't. I'll go first. The underrated thing that I didn't like, 5 guys caught passes. I get you play more conservatively on the road, especially in week 1, but only 2 of them are wide receivers, which I'm kind of nervous about. Not nervous, but something I'm clocking. I know Liam Clifford, it sounded like he was a little bit banged up. It sounds like he was mostly in on run plays. Caden Saunders did not get an offensive snap. Fleming played pretty much every snap that Trey Wallace played, but frankly, Wallace earned the right to be the first look. I think that'll change fairly quickly. Just something I'm monitoring, and it's something that I don't love. One thing I did like, Cam Wallace's willingness as a blocker. Like, on a couple of plays when he got in late in the game when Singleton was still toting the rock, it was 2 running back sets, and Cam Wallace was happily sprinting full speed down the field to try to throw a block. Is he the best blocker? Clearly not, but that willingness is cool. Like, I love the fact that Cam Wallace understands, like, if I'm going to be RB3, if I'm going to be a guy who becomes RB1 in 2025, I have to prove that I can contribute to this team right now. So he had a nice run when he got his opportunity, and I love that he showed willingness to throw his body out there and try to spring a teammate. So something that I think is going to be, forgotten to the sands of time, this underappreciated block in a blowout, but it was cool to see him be willing to do that.
Yeah, underappreciated thing that I liked was the fact that they did a bunch of things that were basically designed to make West Virginia uncomfortable. And whether that was using motion before the snap to kind of open things up, open up windows, get guys moving before the snap, all these sorts of things that we wanted to see out of an Andy Kotelnicki offense. And he has brought with him to Kansas. Early returns that's going to be a big feature of Penn State's offense. And it's something that I am very excited about because with how static the offense was last year, just that little bit of life getting breathed into it, I'm very, very happy that life ended up getting breathed into it. Underrated thing that I didn't like, I want them to get a little bit better. And this was something that Joel Klatt complained about on the broadcast. So I will give Joel Klatt the credit for this one. I want them to get better at. There were a few times when Drew Aller would complete a pass and they pick up the first down, or it's a chance for him to keep building up that rhythm. And I get why they do this, because again, they want to keep West Virginia on their toes. They want West Virginia to not be able to just assume what is or is not going to come. But they would then, in those moments, that's when they're putting Bo in. And that's when they're going to the Bo package. When it's an opportunity for Drew to go, all right, I completed one. Let me go complete two. And after I complete two, let me go complete three. And it's just getting him those layups over and over again to continue to build up that confidence, build up the passing game. My hunch is we're going to see more of that over the next couple of weeks. But I just want them to have a little bit of a better sense of when they're going to go to the Bo package. And just one thing to mention after I looked at it, because I find this really funny. Here were the 4 games last year where Penn State ran for at least 5.3 yards per carry. Number 1 was against Delaware when they ran for 5.3 yards per carry. Number 2 was against UMass when they ran for 6.6 yards per carry, which included 2 carries for 40 yards by Tank Smith.
Shout out Tank Smith, baby.
And then, always, and then perhaps our listeners will understand why this is so funny. They did it 2 more times for the rest of the season. For the rest of the regular season, my dumbass forgot to look at the Ole Miss game. Give me one moment so I could pull that one up. The final times they did it for the remainder of this season. Okay, they did it 3 times for the rest of the season.
I know exactly.
One was against Rutgers, one was against Michigan State, and one was against Ole Miss, which you might know as the games where Mike Yurcich wasn't the offensive coordinator anymore. So, boy, it's funny how this stuff happens, isn't it?
One more thing I want to call out, because I don't know where to put this because I didn't put it in our rundown sheet. One more thing, underrated thing I didn't like. Gabe Wosu's kickoffs did not go in the end zone very often. I don't know how windy it was, especially in that first half. But like after watching Zachariah Branch last night for USC, any chance you have to not put the football in his hands, take advantage of. So didn't like it. Think it can be fixed. But I wanted to make sure I flagged that because I don't know where else to put it. Because I noticed that. And you'd never want to notice your kickoff specialist. But Bill, there is a way you can get noticed out there in the wild, and that's through what you put on your body, whether that be hats, hoodies, t-shirts, crew necks, coaches' jackets, which I have now ordered. I'm very excited about it, from our friends at Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel has been the sponsor of this podcast for about 3 years now, and they make some of the coolest collegiate apparel in the marketplace today. Like I mentioned, not only do they have the great t-shirts, but again, hats, crew necks. Those new coaches' jackets, Bill, are fantastic. I am so excited to get mine, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, so I can rock it throughout the fall. They don't just have Penn State. They have West Virginia. They have pretty much every college team under the sun, and they are always adding more. And our listeners get 15% off their first order with promo code RLR24. Again, with the holidays coming up quick, it's a great opportunity for you to go out there and get something for the college sports fan in your life. And again, for new listeners, with your first order, promo code RLR24 for 15% off that first order. Thank you to Home Field for sponsoring this podcast. And Bill, Tom Allen, overall, not too bad. His guys jumped off sides. They're a little jumpy a little bit, which I think is pretty funny. Got to clean that up. But different than how Manny felt. But overall, I'm pleased with game 1. There's definitely a lot of room for growth, but they only, quote unquote, allowed a touchdown that really wasn't a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the defense just went out there and took care of business, carried themselves. They carried themselves very similarly to last year's defense, where it just never seemed like they felt like they were under any sort of major stress. They have to clean up some stuff with penalties, but I do think a lot of it came down to the fact that Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton very clearly thought they knew the snap count.
Vanover too.
And I believe 4 of their, they had 8 penalties for 60 yards as a team. I believe 4 of them for 20 yards were offside penalties. then, you had that one Abdul Carter late hit where, he, just as a general thing, you need to find that balance between letting him be Abdul Carter and cool off a little bit. But I think that's something that as the season goes on will fix itself. And then one was a pass interference later in the game. So when it was basically already decided. So penalties were the one concern, but for the most part, Penn State went into Morgantown against the vaunted West Virginia rushing attack, which I'm not saying sarcastically. It was legitimately one of the best.
It was the best in the country last year.
Limited them to 2.3 yards per carry. Garrett Green was unable to extend plays with his life. They did everything they needed to do. And then some, because we also had Elliott Washington looking like a wide receiver on an interception
play, man,
which was really nice.
Yeah. When you're,
it was very fun.
When what is he, probably CB5 can go out there and make a play like that. Oh boy, you got some depth in there. Though this defense looked really good. They flew around. Again, you could tell that they wanted to get after the quarterback by how often they were jumping. And again, there's a lot of things to clean up, but similar to last year, the bones are really strong with that unit. One guy I want to call out, Smith Vilbert. The move he had late in the game to get around that left tackle and get a strip sack of Garrett Green was one of the best moves I've seen a defensive end make in a long time. And for a guy who I think is listed still over 290 pounds, to be that agile shows he's been in the lab for the last 2 years, refining his craft. And I'm excited to see his role continue to grow. And then Denai Dennis Sutton is a madman for trying to scoop that ball facing the wrong way. I absolutely love what a maniac he is to think, oh, if I scoop this, maybe I can score instead of just fall on it. Picking it up, facing the complete wrong end zone is so funny, and I love that mentality. I think that's hilarious. But Bill, you called out Elliott Washington. A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber, I thought, looked great. I think they did a really good. Granted, Garrett Green's not exactly the best, passing quarterback, but still, watching those guys go out there and basically shut down anything on the outside was great to see. And then I thought Jalen Reed played his best game in a Penn State uniform. Wildly underrated guy. To watch him fly around freely, to watch him exist closer to the line of scrimmage and make a couple plays behind the line of scrimmage was really cool to see. And then that defensive interior, like we thought, is really stout. And they did a great job, especially on that 4th and short play where they try to do a QB sneak. Penn State's defensive tackles just said, no, you're not doing that. So a lot of things to like from this unit. And I'm curious to see, you look at snap counts, Dom DeLuca played a ton. So did Zakee Wheatley. I'm curious to see how that shifts when they get away from these run-heavy teams like West Virginia, because I'm excited to see more of that 3 safety set.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think it's worth mentioning that if you look at the snap counts in, on the entirety of the defense, number 1 was KJ Winston with 60 snaps. Number 2 was Jalen Reed with 59. And number 3 was Zakee Wheatley with 55. 4th was A.J. Harris was 54. So they were playing their top 3 safeties a ton, regardless of, formations or personnel or anything else.
What was Dom DeLuca at, Bill, if you have that available quickly? Because I feel like
Dom DeLuca played
59?
42.
That's still a ton.
Tony Rojas played 47. Kobe King played 45. Dom DeLuca played 42. DeLuca was 25 run plays and 17 pass plays, which was more run play, tied with Rojas for the most run plays on the team. But the 17 run plays in the linebackers, but the 17 pass plays was behind Rojas and Kobe King. So I think going with Kobe, they were going with King as one of their linebackers in more passing situations. I would need to look into that. But. Yeah. But generally, you look at when West Virginia got their touchdowns in this football game, they scored one, or when they scored in this football game, just as a general thing, their first scoring drive, I believe that featured, no, that wasn't one of the ones that had where the drive got extended by the referees, but that one features their tight end. I forget which Penn State defensive back it was, but I think it might have been
Winston.
I think it was Winston. Yeah, makes an incredible play on the ball, and their tight end just it pops up in the air. Their tight end just manages to come down with it, and they get the huge 25-yard chunk play in the passing game that ended up being tied for their longest passing play of the day, and they end that drive with a field goal. The next scoring drive, another field goal, was one of the drives that got extended because they try to have CJ Donaldson run it on 4th and 1, get stuffed, terrible spot. They keep going. They end up kicking a field goal as a result of that. And then their first touchdown drive came in the second half, at the very beginning of the fourth quarter, where CJ Donaldson looked like he was short of the goal line and they gave him a touchdown. So their scoring drives basically took either A, the referees making bad decisions, or B, a miracle play made by one of their best guys in the passing game. You look at the numbers behind this: 5.6 yards per attempt, 2.3 yards per rush. Donaldson, 3.5 yards per rush. Jaheim White, 4.1 yards per rush. Garrett Green, 10 carries, 5 yards. He got half a yard per rush. Again, wasn't able to extend things with his legs. Penn State just took away, they had a couple of chunk plays in the passing game, 25, 25, 20, 25, were their longest receptions for each of their top 4 receiving targets. But they did everything they needed to do. They took just about everything away from West Virginia. And in the second half of the game, when they basically could not run the football, first half, 26 rushes for 74 yards, 18 passes for 89 yards. Nice little balance there. But weren't able to finish off drives. Second half, 11 rushes for 15 yards and 11 passes for 72 yards. They bottled up the rushing attack completely, which was what West Virginia builds their entire offense around. They didn't let Green get loose. They limited how bad the chunk plays were in the passing game. Other than, again, a couple of penalties that were largely related to them thinking they knew the snap count, you could not have asked for anything else out of Penn State's defense.
Bill, does this game change anything for you? The outlook of the season, what you think the ceiling of this team can be? I still might plant my flag at 10-2, but I can easily see the path to 11-1. And again, it's week 1. Teams get the most better. It's a horrible way to word that. Teams have the biggest improvement between week 1 and week 2. We've always heard coaches say. So I think that we've seen a version of this Penn State team, but I don't think it's the best version of this Penn State team. But I really do think, and I think you're seeing a lot of national media talk about this, I think what Penn State has in Andy Kotelnicki can change the direction of this entire season. And I am more optimistic towards 11-1 today than I was, 48 hours ago.
Yeah, I mean, I know you disagree with where I stand on this, but I don't think you just judge Penn State off of Penn State and what Penn State can accomplish off of Penn State. You judge it off of the entirety of their schedule. I think you judge that off of also the other teams they're going to end up playing. I want to see more out of USC. Impressive win last night, but I think it's possible that LSU isn't especially great, and LSU was still able to move the ball on them a good bit. Going to Camp Randall is going to be tough, even if Wisconsin didn't look particularly convincing in their win over Western Michigan at home.
Real quick, how is Ches Malusi still in college? That dude was there. That dude was there as a transfer from Clemson at the Penn State-Wisconsin game in 2021, and he is still there, dude. That's crazy.
I mean, this is his 6th year in college football. That's a funny thing to say when there is someone who literally caught a touchdown for Miami in his 9th year of eligibility.
Never graduate.
But yes, I do. Yeah, don't ever do that. And then Ohio State, it took them a little while to get up and running against Akron, but once they did, they looked like one of the best teams in the country. Funny enough, FPI actually has Penn State as a slight favorite to win that game right now. FPI as Penn State is about a 53.7% chance to win. But so much of it for me comes down to what they look like over these next couple of games. And a big reason why, and this is something that I'm sure we'll talk about in the lead up to the Bowling Green game and whatever else we do, was once Penn State got past the West Virginia hurdle last season, obviously that one was at home, so an important thing to mention. So much of the offense and so much of the approach of the offense seemed to be built around, we need to make sure that Drew doesn't experience any adversity, that we limit mistakes, we limit turnovers, we limit opportunities to put the ball in danger. And if that means that in the lead up to the Ohio State game, Drew is going to throw for 204 yards against Delaware, 208 against Illinois, 166 against Iowa, 189 against Northwestern, 162 against UMass, then so be it. And then, of course, you add in the fact that Trey Wallace got hurt. The season just, lost the guy who we think could have been Penn State's number one target in the receiving game. The running game never really got off, like all these sorts of things. I'm more optimistic heading into this slate: Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA, all at home.
And a bye in there.
And then, of course, the bye before USC, at Wisconsin, and another bye between USC and Wisconsin. That's weird. USC bye at Wisconsin, Ohio State. But so much of it's going to come down to how Penn State carries itself, how Penn State takes care of business in these next couple of games. They passed their first test with flying colors. They did the same thing last year. I do think this one felt similar in that we saw Drew Aller play with so much confidence. We saw him play like a guy who believes in himself in a way that he just maybe did not last year. Nick Singleton's long on the ground last year in that game was 14 yards. Drew carried the ball 4 times for a yard against West Virginia last year. So there are things working in Penn State's favor as they head into this next stretch of the schedule. I'm still in wait and see mode on how they handle these next couple of weeks. I'm now, my ears are now perked up about USC. My ears are perked up about Ohio State because they just generally are. But that first test, they passed it with flying colors, and you couldn't be asked for much more than that.
Drew stiff-armed. I can't believe we haven't mentioned it yet. Jeremiah Trotter's son.
Oh, I mentioned
did
it.
you?
I did mention
it. I was
about
to say, I don't think I talked about it yet. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That dude's got a swagger about him this year, which I'm excited about. But Bill, game balls. Give me one on offense. Sure. Give me one on defense. Give me one miscellaneous. We don't have to give a special teams one because, again, Sanders Haydak missed a field goal, which I'm now monitoring to see the Ryan Barker of it all this week. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You can go first.
So for offense, I want to give it to Trey Wallace because I think he deserves it, but I'm going to give it to an underappreciated guy here, and that's Anthony Donko. The guy run blocked really well. Again, part of unit that allowed no sacks. That was his first real extended action in a college football game, and he clearly held off former 5-star Nolan Rucci to win that job, and he proved that he deserved it. So very excited to see what a redshirt freshman whose first start was on the road in a hostile environment and played that well can develop into. So offensively, I'm going to give it to Anthony Donko. Defensively, Jalen Reed. Again, maybe I have to acknowledge that he might have been the most underrated player on the Penn State defense the last couple of years, and I'm going to make sure I never do that again. So Jalen Reed played great. That one play where Garrett Green fumbles the snap and it bounced right off of him, to watch Jalen Reed go like a heat-seeking missile and bring him down behind the line of scrimmage is great instincts. So offense for me goes to Anthony Donko. Defense goes to Jalen Reed. Miscellaneous goes to Vega Ioane for going in motion and then just pass blocking.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing on the miscellaneous one just because that was there. I noticed that live and I went, hey, there's no way that actually happened. And then I went back and watched the exact play, and they're going to get I tweeted that out on my account. I'll retweet myself from the blog or something, but you'll see that play at some point this season where they had Trey Wallace and Amari Evans lined up at receiver, Vega in the slot. Again, he comes across in motion and goes in at left guard from there, which is just the position that he plays. But they use that look. They did that a few times in the running game as a way to have a 350-pound man basically block someone with a full head of steam behind him to open up a hole. So sometime this season, that is going to lead to a big chunk play. In the passing game, I don't know when it's going to be, but that is going to happen because an opposing team is going to sell out so hard on it. But offensively, I'll give mine to Drew Aller. Drew Aller and Trey Wallace. I'll have them share it, which is, I think, what the team did as well. Both of them, Drew looked like an NFL quarterback. Well, he had some stuff with his footwork that wasn't particularly great early on. He looked a little bit wound up early on. But once he got that sorted out, he looked like an NFL quarterback, which is what Penn State needs him to look like. And Trey Wallace looked like a wide receiver one. There were he caught 5 balls for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was fantastic, whether that was in the open field, whether that was making sure he got his feet down on the touchdown grab, whether that was, he was the guy that Penn State needed him to be last year. Has to stay healthy, has to remain on the field. But if he could do that, I'm really optimistic about what he could do this season. Then on the defensive side of the field, I had a feeling you were going to give it to Jalen Reed, which is completely and utterly understandable. He was fantastic. I'm going to give it to Zane Durant, who looked just really lively, really active. 4 tackles, 2 solo, 1 sack, 1.5 tackles for loss, going up against an elite offensive line, one of the best offensive lines in the country. And he never looked like he was all that bothered by the fact that he was going up against such a great unit. So I'm going to go with Zane Durant. Really excited for what he can do this season, especially if the ideal for a quote unquote undersized defensive tackle, which is funny to say about a human who is 6'1" and 290 pounds, is they're in the Aaron Donald mold, where they're just really lively, really active, able to interrupt an offense from the interior of the offensive line, which frees things up for the guys off the edge to have one-on-ones the entire time. And Zane Durant looks like a kind of guy who could do that. So great game for him. Great game for a ton of guys on defense. But I will, because you took Jalen Reed, I will go with Zane Durant.
If you would have told me the only people to record sacks in this game for this Penn State defense would be Smith Vilbert and Zane Durant, I have no idea what I would have even said to you. Either that's great or that's terrible. Turns out it was great. Bill, anything else you want to talk about before we send the folks into their week? Penn State is back home for the first time this season against Bowling Green this weekend. It's a noon kick on the Big Ten Network. No broadcast team has been announced. We'll preview that later on in the week. And then we go into a bye week, and then it's another MAC team. So a little bit of a weird part of the schedule here. Anything you want to talk about before we send the folks off?
Do you want to do 5 minutes on Bowling Green? I know I'm springing this on you last second. So if you do not want to, I would totally understand.
Scott Loeffler is a decent coach. They played on Thursday of last week and won. They are in Ohio. Their quarterback is Connor Bazelak, who played under Tom Allen at Indiana. Penn State is a 30-point favorite. And I haven't done much research into them just yet beside that. So we will... don't really know. I don't believe there's any Penn State connection. I always look for that, especially in these non-conference games, because I always think it's interesting. But I hope that a lot of guys catch passes first and foremost.
Yeah, it's just took some notes on them. They beat Georgia Tech in Atlanta last year, and they had an admirable showing in their loss in a bowl game to Minnesota. So they're a team that has a bit of experience going up against P5 talent. Like you mentioned, Connor Bazelak spent a year at Indiana, did not play against Penn State that year. I believe he was injured. 104th in SP Plus coming into the season, but a really good showing against Fordham last week. They have a pair of really good skill position players on offense. Their tight end Harold Fanning was a first-team All-MAC selection, and their running back Terrion Stewart had a big game last week against Fordham. 8 returning starters on offense, 7 on defense. Phil Steele had them as the number 3 team in the MAC, and they're built around the trenches on both sides of the football. It's going to be a game that Penn State should win comfortably, but it's a really good challenge, and it's a really good opportunity, because if they don't bring it from the jump, they don't bring it from the jump, Bowling Green is going to have them in a really tight, testy football game. And like I mentioned last week, like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, last year when Penn State got into the portion of the schedule, not portion of the schedule, when they went up against G5 opponents or FCS, even, an FCS opponent in Delaware, Drew Aller's stat lines in those games: 22 for 26, 204 yards, 7.8 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown against Delaware. Again, a team that Penn State should have, Penn State could have let him get loose, but just decided not to. And then against UMass, 16 for 23, 162 yards, 7 yards per attempt, and 3 touchdowns. This is a game for Drew Aller, a guy who we could just read between the lines and say, he was not an especially confident kid. Give him an opportunity to build his confidence up against a team that Penn State should beat pretty comfortably. So we'll have a full preview a little bit later in the week, but should be a comfortable win for Penn State. But that is the thing above everything else I'm going to be keeping an eye on. How do they let Drew Aller specifically approach this football game? Because if they let him let it rip, try to put numbers up in the passing game, I think that's a signal that they think that Penn State's passing attack is worlds better, farther ahead, whatever you want to say, than it was at this point last year, in large part because they have a quarterback that they trust in a lot more than it seems like they did last
Good
season.
call out, Bill, on Bowling Green's ability to punch above their weight class. One thing I want to make sure I flag here, and I don't know if it really matters, but I think it's interesting. The last time Andy Kotelnicki coached a game in Beaver Stadium, he had a MAC team up on a ranked Penn State team at halftime. Buffalo led 10-7 in 2019 at halftime before Penn State remembered they were Penn State and, slammed the door. But don't do that again. Don't play with your food. I think Andy Kotelnicki is not the kind of guy to let that happen, but it's interesting. And again, it's cool that Andy Kotelnicki, his first game coaching in Beaver Stadium is against a MAC team when, again, he had his MAC team up at halftime last time he was here. So, fun little storyline. I don't think it really matters, but something I want to flag. Bill, that's all I got. So thank you so much for joining me on this lovely Labor Day. Hope everybody enjoys the holiday. I hope if you went to the West Virginia game, you had a great time. Hope you travel safe. Be sure to follow us on Twitter over at RLR Blog. We've been tweeting a lot throughout the course of this week because it's been a lot of fun to do so. Be sure to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Give us a like. If you're jump in the comments. Talk about the Penn State game with other Penn State fans. Thank you to our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Again, it's 15% off your first order with promo code RLR24. Bill, I think that's everything that I have to hit on to close things out. I don't have my script in front of me, but thank you as always for listening. For my co-host, Bill DeFilippo, I'm Matt Lipovitz. Take care, everyone. Go State. PJ Fleck cost the Big Ten a perfect week 1.